कोरोना वायरस के दौरान भी मसला कश्मीर आलमी मंजर पर मौजूद। तहरीक कश्मीर बरतानिया के ज़ेर एहतमाम बरतानिया की तारीख में पहली मरतबा कश्मीर की मौजूदा हालात पर ब्रिटिश पार्लियामेंटेरियंस की ऑनलाइन कॉन्फ्रेंस मुनक्कद करवाई। कश्मीर कॉन्फ्रेंस में बड़ी तादाद में बरतानिया की हुकूमती जमात कंजर्वेटिव, अपोजिशन जमात लेबर और स्कॉटिश नेशनल पार्टी के मेंबरान पार्लियामेंट ने शिरकत करके मोदी सरकार की कोरोना वायरस की आड़ में नहते कश्मीरियों के कत्लेआम को बेनकाब करने में अहम किरदार अदा किया। इस कॉन्फ्रेंस की सदारत राजा फ़हीम कियानी सदर तहरीक कश्मीर बरतानिया ने की और सरदार मसूद खान सदर रियासत आज़ाद जम्मू कश्मीर ने बतौर मेहमान खुसूसी शिरकत की। हुर्रियत कायदीन गुलाम मोहम्मद सफ़ी, अल्ताफ़ अहमद भट्ट के अलावा कंजर्वेटिव एमपीज़ पॉल ब्रिस्टो, स्टीव बेकर, जोनाथन गुलिस, जेम्स टेरी, माइकल लॉन्गी, एंथनी हैगन बाथम और सारा ब्रिटक्लिफ ने शिरकत की। स्कॉटिश नेशनल पार्टी की मेंबर ऑफ पार्लियामेंट एलिसन थ्यूरिस, लेबर पार्टी के मेंबरान जेस फिलिप्स, एंड्रयू गोविन, केट हॉलिन, रिचर्ड बर्गन, ट्रेसी बाबिन और रेचल हॉपकिन ने भी अपने ख्यालात का इज़हार किया और मकबूजा जम्मू कश्मीर में भारतीय हुकूमत की इंसानी हकूक़ की खिलाफ वर्जियों की मज़म्मत की। मोदी के रवैये ने साबित कर दिया है कि वो अपने इंतहा पसंद नज़रिए अखंड भारत के लिए कोई भी कदम उठा सकता है। अक़वाम आलम को फौरी तौर पर ऐसी हिकमत अमली बनानी चाहिए कि मसला कश्मीर को अक़वाम मुत्तहिदा की करारदादों के ज़रिए हल करके इस खित्ते को जंग से बचाया जा सके। इस कॉन्फ्रेंस की निज़ामत के फ़राइज़ इशफ़ाक़ हुसैन ने अदा किए। सैयद फ़रत अब्बास काज़मी।
The first point that I want to make is that we feel for you. I mean, the people here in Azad Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, feel for the people of the United Kingdom. You're facing this pandemic. Before I deliver my remarks, I would like to recognize all these MPs, honorable MPs who are sitting here, and I'm touched by your presence. Uprising. This is indigenous, and the Indians from time to time resort to these fabricated lies. They tell that Pakistan is starting a new chapter of terrorism or is launching new entities. This is all false. I call it Indian commanders' fog of lies, because they think that everything would be lost in this fog of lies, while the rest of the world is preoccupied with the coronavirus. As I mentioned earlier, that the Jammu and Kashmir territory might become COVID-19 hotspot. Kashmir is no more related to the national aspirations of the people of Jammu and Kashmir in their political future. Unfortunately, because of the fascist policies that India is pursuing, it has become now part of the civilizational war that India has started, a religious war that India has started. So the civilizational fault lines of this conflict are becoming much more relevant now. It is now Hindus versus Muslims, which we did not want in the beginning. So simply I can say that this is a toxic brew, and because what we see there is that there are these crimes against humanity and genocide and ethnic cleansing and war crimes being committed in the territory with impunity and without accountability. The crux of the matter is that we should strive to put an end to the egregious human rights violations, strive for the realization of the right to self-determination of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, strive for the implementation of the United Nations Security Council resolutions. This is all about diplomacy. I've been a diplomat all my life, and I can tell you that diplomacy works if we are persistent, if there's collective political will to resolve an issue. And the alternative is war, and war is not going to resolve this problem. You know what? We're pursuing diplomacy through these conferences also, so that we can manage the anger of the entrapped and besieged Kashmiris, because they have no outlet. And that's why it is so important to keep these conversations going. I would say that if there is another pandemic more lethal than the COVID-19 pandemic, that would be this pandemic of peace and security in Jammu and Kashmir. This war and peace situation, there. And if this, Kashmir explodes, if there's a war, if there's a large-scale militancy or resistance, armed resistance, it would affect not only Kashmiris, India and Pakistan, it would affect the entire world. Now, what is the way forward? And the way forward is that I would appreciate, as Mr. Steve Baker did in the past, many other friends did, that we should have a full-fledged debate in the House of Commons, even in these difficult circumstances, because we need to shine a light on the crimes against humanity that are being perpetrated in the occupied territory. Prime Minister's question I think that's a very good venue for raising the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. It has been raised in the recent past. You know, people in the United Kingdom, they walk on eggshells because they say that, well, it's a bilateral issue. And what we want to underline is that it's not a bilateral issue, because even according to the United Nations Security Council resolutions, which everybody subscribed to, they say that India and Pakistan would create an enabling environment for ascertaining the wishes of the Kashmiri people. The Kashmiri people will decide and determine their political future. So it is genuinely a trilateral issue, and the United Nations has a role to play in it. So debates in the House of Commons, in the House of Lords, I think that after Brexit, the United Kingdom's position in the United Nations Security Council has become even more important. And you can demonstrate leadership on the issue of Jammu and Kashmir. It is difficult, I know your limitations, but I think that...
and it doesn't seem I think it was the second or third week in February, I was in Muzaffarabad speaking with His Excellency the President about the issues we're talking about today. I, together with other colleagues from the APPG, visited the region to get the first-hand experiences of ordinary people within Kashmir. And it was appalling. These are human rights abuses on a daily basis, on an industrial scale, for which we never really see any reference in the media of any kind. In other areas where human rights have been abused, they're on the front page of the papers and they are talked about on the news. In Kashmir, that is not the case. As parliamentarians, we have a duty, I believe, and as internationalists, to work through the United Nations to ensure that United Nations Resolution 47 is enacted, that a plebiscite is put in place, the right to self-determination. How can any parliamentarian who believes in democracy not support that concept? I'm a member of the Justice Select Committee in the UK Parliament. I could list numerous examples of this, but within Indian administered Kashmir, you can be detained without charge for 2 years. One day before the 2-year period is up, you can then be detained for another 2 years after that. There are young children, young people who are being detained for lengthy periods of time with no charge. And this is only one example of human rights abuses. So it has been wonderful to hear from His Excellency the President again. But we must, as colleagues, I agree with everything that all my colleagues have said. We must, as parliamentarians, I think, be vocal. We must take action. We must highlight the human rights abuses. And human rights abuses are something for the whole world to lobby and to protect. And I can tell you from my first-hand experience, speaking with people who have suffered in Indian occupied administered Kashmir, this is a spark could set this conflict off on a much wider basis. These are two nuclear powers, and this really should be at the top of the international agenda. But it comes down to that: human rights, equality, the right to live your life as you wish. That should be what we are all campaigning for. And I agree with everything that my colleagues have said.
Because there are two or three things I think we all need to do. For us as parliamentarians, we need to do the soft lobbying within our own parties. within our own parties to try and change attitudes of our front benchers and ministers on this. And we need hard lobbying too, through debate, through questions, etc. We have to make this a political issue, I think, not a party political issue, but a political issue. And to do that, we need to change, as I said, mindsets within the government, the Labour front bench and all of our parties. And we need to do that by using the sizable Kashmiri diaspora and make sure that they're vocal on this issue. They are, which is a good thing, but we need to make sure that that continues. Because we've all heard of the violence, we've all heard of political oppression, and we've all heard about repressive laws. We've even all heard about murder. But Mr. President, what would be helpful from you, I think, is when we do have this debate in Parliament, working with yourself and others, I think would be very helpful is to have dates, names, and details as much as you can of the oppression and incidents that have happened there. Because we've all seen the videos, we've all seen evidence of this, we've all watched the images, and every time these are put forward, those images, those videos, etc., they are questioned by obviously supporters of the Indian government. Insofar as we can, we need to make sure that this evidence is beyond question. And when we do that, I know it's difficult, but if we are able to do that, it would make our argument so much more stronger. And finally, I also think that we have something which is really, really achievable here. We have to be realistic about what we can achieve, but there's a few things. The revocation of Article 35 and 350, we need to make sure that that becomes a political issue beyond just the UK. It needs to become something that any right-minded person in the world who believes in democracy and human rights would support the re-establishment of those articles. And then the bit we've been talking about earlier, about this being a tripartite issue, the feelings, the wishes of the people of Kashmir and Jammu need to be taken into account when the future of Kashmir and Jammu is discussed, because that is not the situation at the moment. The United Kingdom, when it's had its own territorial...
We are under triple lockdown. The first lockdown was imposed in 1989, which you know better than me. My all colleagues here are present. Second lockdown was imposed on 5th August in the order of abrogation of Article 370 and 35A. And third lockdown is under the order of this COVID-19. Here, since 5th August, the Modi himself is involved. Modi himself is involved to change the social and political structure of Kashmir. The Kashmir, which is known as a paradise. The paradise on earth. Modi and his colleagues, especially Amit Shah and Ajit Doval, after scrapping up Article 370 and 35, but they have changed. I would like to apprise, they have changed the basic structure of the Kashmir. They changed the political and administrative structure of the paradise of the world. And I would like to say that this change will create an atmosphere and will lead to a big human genocide in Indian occupied Kashmir. These changes, including new domicile law, will turn the most beautiful place of the world into hell. The state of Indian Jammu and Kashmir will be the battlefield between the Kashmiris and RSS goons. Kashmir is not a bilateral issue. Basic issue is which we have to understand, which you have highlighted time and again in your parliament. You have supported us. This issue is the basic issue we have to settle as per the wishes of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, as per the resolutions of the United Nations, which have been approved, which have been accepted by the all the parties of this long pending Kashmir conflict. The question is raised by the people of Indian occupied Kashmir, who have been victimized by the victimization of Indian especially the fascist Modi.
But I just did want to join this call, particularly because in Batley and Spen, we have a very engaged Kashmiri community and Kashmir heritage community who are deeply troubled that COVID is being used as a bit of a smokescreen to continue the human rights abuses in Kashmir. And also, obviously, the recent letters that came from Keir Starmer. We were discussing the Labour Party's position and unequivocally supporting the right for Kashmiri self-determination. And I'm really pleased to see on a Sunday other MPs and colleagues as well on this call, and just to say that you have our 100% support. Certainly, we are seeing the future of Kashmir being parked, I think, by the Conservative government. I think we need leadership, and in a way that we can, there was conversations from Lisa Nandy about getting somebody like Jonathan Powell, somebody who's really experienced at bringing people to a table to find a resolution. It can't be something we keep talking about and going around in circles for decade after decade. You know, this has gone on for far too long. It is an opportunity now with new leadership and with potentially a new Labour government in the next few years to try and support you to get the outcomes that you want, and certainly my community in Batley and Spen, the outcomes that they want. Because as every day goes by, the lack of information, the lack of connectivity, the fact that they are seeing across India attacks, how they see attacks on Muslims and their identity is particularly heartbreaking. And just to say that I'm here to support you and to support my other colleagues going forward. But we absolutely need a more urgent, practical plan to get people around the table and to stop this being something just we talk about all the time, but nothing, you know, gets done. So I'm here to listen as well. So thank you very much for inviting me on the call.
This will benefit us in formulating a strategy for the resolution of the issue of Jammu and Kashmir, for which we are striving on political and diplomatic front. And our brothers in the diaspora, Tehreek Kashmir, UK, and others, they are doing a wonderful job. And I, as the convener of all Tehreek Hurriyat Jammu and Kashmir, I would, in the interest of the tension-free and conflict-free South Asia and a peaceful world, would like the issue of Jammu and Kashmir to be resolved in accordance with the relevant UN Security Council resolutions and the aspirations of the people of Jammu and Kashmir.
I mean, everything that my colleagues have said, obviously, I would associate myself with, specifically with Andrew and Steve Baker, with regard to the need for talks and a genuine process and accord to try and move forward with this. Because what we cannot have, and whilst I thank the President for his time and reassure him that regardless of what is happening in our country with regards to coronavirus, human rights violations around the world will never stop being at the top of our priority list, and that actually tackling the coronavirus, if it's taught us anything, it is that you cannot tackle it in isolation. You cannot tackle these things in isolation, that we need whole world approaches to these things. But with regard to moving forward to the idea of some form of an accord and what Britain's role might have in that, the people that we have on this call, between us, we should be able to push for some action from our own government in this regard. And whilst it's vitally important that we keep on hearing about what is going on the ground, we have agency as parliamentarians, and I'm sure that we will go away from this and work with the various friends of Kashmir from our own political parties, organisations, and also the all-party parliamentary group, of which we are all members, to seek some action in this regard from our own government, and some idea of how they will take deals forward with Modi's government, never forgetting this as an issue on the table when that goes ahead. And so I thank everybody for their time, but we must make sure that this leads to action from all of us, each and every one of us, to push our government to be doing what it needs to do.
These very important issues. Now, I have never subscribed to the view that this is a bilateral matter. Of course, India and Pakistan have to talk to one another, but there can be no decisions about Kashmir without the involvement of the people of Kashmir and the Kashmiri diaspora around the world. And so I think it's really important that as British parliamentarians, we seek to use our position in the House of Commons and House of Lords to ensure that those voices are heard in the British parliamentary system as well. I think you're absolutely right that we should use our role on the international stage to ensure not only that the human rights abuses are dealt with at an international level and are not just talked about, but where possible, we are able to bring those abuses to an end through diplomacy. But also, we have to look to the future, and that is the future of the people of Kashmir to have that most basic fundamental human right to decide by whom they are governed and how they are governed, something that we in the United Kingdom enjoy as a basic human right. And I think that it would be unforgivable if the eyes of the world turned away from the plight of the people in Indian-occupied Kashmir at this time of coronavirus crisis, that we look in on ourselves at a time of crisis, because actually these injustices across the globe are injustices to each and every one of us if we believe in humanity and the human race. I would like to know from you, Mr. President, in addition to the measures that you've outlined that you think we could use our positions in the British Parliament to further the cause of the Kashmiri people, what more do you think we can do to try and open up that discussion, to facilitate that discussion between Pakistan, India and the Kashmiri people on the future of Kashmir? I've always believed it will take some form of international leadership, in the same way that the Clinton administration ensured that Senator George Mitchell was the go-between between the British and the Irish in terms of difficulties that we've had in our own islands, and likewise the Carter administration with the Camp David Accords, the Clinton administration trying to push for peace in the Middle East too, and the Norwegians showing leadership with the Oslo Accords.
Thank you very much, and thank you to organising this discussion, which I think is really valuable and of course comes at a very important time. We as MPs have been making clear over here that the lockdown in Kashmir prior to the coronavirus situation was of course in Indian-occupied Kashmir a 7-month long lockdown with an internet blockout and other human rights abuses. So of course we, in every way we can, Labour MPs and MPs from all the parties really in Parliament, will speak up for the decades overdue justice and self-determination for the Kashmiri people in accordance with UN Resolution 47, but also have been very mindful in more recent times of the Modi government's unilateral revocation of Article 370 and Article 35A of the Constitution, because of course that granted Indian-occupied Kashmir autonomy, which is reflective of its status as an occupied territory. And it's in that context that the 7-month prior to coronavirus lockdown, nothing to do with coronavirus lockdown for those 7 months has taken place. You know, we do believe that it's a bilateral issue. We do believe that the United Kingdom has a special responsibility to do all that we can to facilitate justice and self-determination for the Kashmiri people, given our historic involvement in that area of the world.
Thank you, host, and thank you, Your Excellency, for again reminding us, as if we did really need reminding, but it is good always to hear from you about the terrible situation in Jammu and Kashmir. I am not going to repeat what all of my colleagues have already said, being mindful of the time, but just to reinforce that message of solidarity that all parliamentarians here in the United Kingdom stand with the people of Kashmir and the members of their families that live in the various constituencies across the country. So what I would say is that I believe that, you know, the time has come for us to offer more than just solidarity. And I think what we need to do as parliamentarians is to speak up as loud as we can within our own parliament and make sure that that very question that I believe my colleague Steve Baker mentioned earlier in this presentation, which is, what is the point of the UN if the UN cannot intervene in these terrible circumstances? So with that in mind, I'd like to thank you again. It's more important that we hear from you than you from us probably, but thank you again for joining us this afternoon.
Solidarity for the people of Jammu and Kashmir. The lockdown that we have felt in the UK, whilst having to sacrifice a small amounts of our personal freedom, can't even come close to that of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, who are now, as Richard said just before, in a 7-month lockdown where there are human rights violations, and the fact that we're unable to send people in to see what's going on the ground from the United Nations, I think is deeply and gravely concerning. I would want to see the British government use its voice within the United Nations and us as MPs within the Houses of Parliament to raise this issue loudly and clearly, that no longer can we just sit on the sideline, but instead we must become the leader at the table and ensure that people have their voices heard. I have many residents in Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Tork who have family members or loved ones and friends out there who are petrified for their family and loved ones' safety. And I can't begin to sit here and not have those things called out. So, you know, I want to show my absolute commitment and solidarity. I look forward to one day being able to go and visit the region and hopefully seeing you again, Your Excellency, one day very soon. And like Steve said earlier on, it's quite clear that the Indian government, and that is very clear, we must talk about the Indian government, not the Indian people. It's the Indian government and their religious nationalism and the persecution of Muslims that is simply...
For the technical issues that I have had. Firstly, I myself, along with James and Mark, visited Kashmir and the Line of Control this year, and we saw firsthand the atrocities, and we were able to go on the ground and speak to people's families that it really affected. And here in my constituency, I'm able to speak to people whose family members are over there, and I think it's very important that this is a cross-party approach, so that we all really do work together on this to raise its profile and to make sure that it's heard. Really, we've got to be able to work together, and I think that's now the way that we go forward. Now, unfortunately, I have missed what other people have previously said due to the technical issues, but I do think we all agree that nowhere should we see these human rights atrocities, and it's very, very important now that we speak up together. And there was a debate planned, but unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we haven't been able to do that. So I would be hoping that there will be a debate on this in the near future in the House of Commons, where we can all raise this together. And I will fully support this, and I'll continue to do that with my colleagues as a cross-party approach, which I think is vital.
Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. President, for the very insightful presentation that you gave us. I think it's really important that we really do understand what's going on the ground, and you gave us exactly that. I'll keep it very short. I think what this conference has shown us is that there is incredible cross-party consensus on this issue in the UK. And I do believe that the UK has a very powerful voice on the world stage. And as UK parliamentarians, we have a very clear role to make sure that the UK is using that to maximum effect, because the situation on the ground in Kashmir, as you said, is just awful, and anything we can do, we absolutely should do. So I think, you know, the point you made about having a debate on this in the House is absolutely essential, and I very much look forward to part in it. So thank you again. I will keep it very short and sweet, and I think if we can keep these conferences going to make sure that we continue to have up-to-date information, that would be very helpful from our perspective.
And fundamental rights around the world. And in particular, I think there's a wider aspect that we can now take advantage of in this awful situation. And that is that one of the fundamental rights people have is their equality before the law. And I think there's now ample evidence when we look at India, in the Indian press, that the BJP government is not pursuing a policy of the equality of everyone before the law. There is ample evidence of the persecution of Muslims in India. It is outrageous, and it should be called out as outrageous by governments around the world. So this is not to attack or criticise the people of India. It is to say that this government of India is pursuing a policy of religious nationalism and evidently persecuting Muslims, and that must stop. It must be called out, and I think in calling it out and appealing to the UN to uphold the rights for which it was established, the principles for which it was established, that could give us an opportunity to say, and as we move forwards, we must have...
That's happening in Kashmir currently, particularly with internet access. Doctors are being unable to download information to help treat their patients. And of course, the additional problems is for young people accessing the internet for studies. So I think whilst this is a worldwide problem, it would be a good opportunity for this group of people to highlight the devastating impact the government's decisions are having on Kashmir in particular. As always, I'll always be there to support the Kashmir people. I think to me it's quite simple. If human rights have been violated, then United Nations needs to step in immediately. And I think this is an opportune time to put pressure on to make sure that people's rights are upheld and that Kashmir...
Priority to represent many of my constituents in Luton South who are of Kashmiri origin, who have friends and family still living in Kashmir, who are under terrible situations at the moment. I join with what everyone else has said around tackling human rights abuses wherever they are. It is a responsibility for all of us. I will continue to pursue this issue, work with others collectively, and until we can see greater change.
We certainly will do. I have continuing concerns raised by my constituents who have family and friends in Kashmir, and they want to know that their family and friends will be safe, both just now with the outbreak going on and for the future. So anything that I can do to be of assistance, I'm more than happy to offer my help. And from my point of view, you will understand as an SNP MP from Scotland that the right to self-determination is something that I feel very strongly about, and I feel very strongly that it is for the people of Jammu Kashmir to decide their own future and to have that future in the...
Say Sardar Masood Khan, President of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, British parliamentarians, Hurriyat leaders, Ghulam Muhammad Safi, Altaf Bhatt, who are the direct victims of this conflict, and dear participants. Assalamu alaikum, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to welcome everyone and
wish to say, if that's okay. I'm now going to ask our chief guest, the Excellency Sardar Masood, President of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, to tell us a little bit about what's going on and his input.